Entonces, Yakuza es como un GTA japonés.
Sí, algo así. Yakuza. If there's ever been a series that went from total obscurity to immense popularity, this one is it. A merit that was achieved through undying loyalty from the fans and being an outstanding series bursting with quality. With each entry offering its own flavor in story, character, and gameplay, while constantly trying to improve the formula. With its ever-growing popularity, more people want to get into the series. But that naturally brings the most common question related to long-running media. Where the fuck do I start? That's where I step in. I'm about to tell you what makes every Yakuza game so unique from one another, and which ones I believe are the best to newcomers. But first, I have to give you a quick rundown of what exactly is Yakuza. This is a series that primarily focuses on 3D beat-em-up action. In battle, the player is able to use hand-to-hand combat, grab and throw enemies, or wield weapons and objects. The main attraction of these encounters are the hit actions, a mechanic that lets the player execute different devastating maneuvers depending on the situation they find themselves in. Some games make you play as different characters, and others give you the option to change fighting styles on the go. By combining these elements, the combat in Yakuza games offer variety and reward. In between these battles, you have a sizable map to explore, offering a wide array of fun activities to sink your teeth in. From sub-stories where you can help people with their problems while getting yourself into absurd situations. There's also mini-games like baseball, bowling, cabaret clubs, karaoke, casinos, even old arcade games from Sega, and so much more. Another draw of the series is how it lets us, the non-Japanese players, get a taste of what Japanese culture is like. From the settings that faithfully recreate the places they're based on, from the fun activities you can take part of, how it uses the Japanese mafia as a basis for storytelling, or how it has a very unique sense of humor. For this video, I'll be taking into account every single Yakuza game in existence. But just like I did with the Metroid video, there's a few titles I wanna get out of the way before I move into the important entries. Ryuga Gotoku Kensan and Ryuga Gotoku Ishin. The two forbidden jewels that are extremely inaccessible because they're still not localized. Fans continue to beg Sega to bring them overseas. But as it stands, at the time of this video, we cannot even consider them to newcomers. Kurohyo, Ryuga Gotoku Shinsho, and Kurohyo ni, Ryuga Gotoku Ashura-hen. Two spin-off titles that feature an entirely new protagonist, were PSP exclusive, and were never localized. I think that speaks for itself. Fist of the North Star, Lost Paradise. A crossover with the Fist of the North Star manga series. Due to its nature, it's safe to assume that this is a game you can enjoy better by being a fan of these two franchises. And finally, we have Ryuga Gotoku Online, the gacha game that remained in Japan and I couldn't find much information about. So yeah, this isn't even an option. Only thing I can say is that I think the art is pretty cool. So now that that has been dealt with, shall we move on to the entries you wanna hear about? Yakuza I is a game I don't need to expand much upon because I already did. As the first entry of the series, it embodies everything I told you during that quick rundown. Combat has a more arcade feeling to it. Minigames are as basic as you can get, and sub-stories don't get as crazy as future games will make them. Although I think that last bit works in favor to the story, as it is very simple and easy to understand. From that angle, Yakuza I is one of the best starting points for newcomers. But there are certain things to consider. The game is not very accessible since it was a PlayStation 2 exclusive outside of Japan. And the fact that it released in 2005 means that it has some slight annoyances that future games will iron out. Like dialogue being necessary to transition into regular battles or fix camera angles. I also think that Yakuza I varies a lot in quality with the bosses. Either they are very good or extremely frustrating. And the pacing suffers from a lot of back and forth between the same places until it decides to continue with the story. It's still worth the time, but considering all that I have said, and another game I'll check down the road, you'll see there are better alternatives. To not make a short story long, Yakuza II does the main job a sequel should, and it does it right. It adds more to the combat, it gives you more content in the form of eateries, sub-stories and minigames, and also adds a whole new area to explore in Osaka. But I believe that the biggest improvement over its predecessor is the story. I genuinely think it's one of the best the series has delivered. Yakuza stories often tend to be self-contained, rarely borrowing elements from other games. The story in 2, however, actually takes a lot from the last entry, making a smart use of pre-established elements and characters while also adding new memorable ones. I said this in the past, and I'll say it again. Ryuji Goda? The best! One of the best fucking antagonists in the entire series. It's that same reason as to why Yakuza II is not a good entry point for newcomers. I repeat, it has one of the best stories, and it's superior to its predecessor in almost every aspect. But if you want to fully enjoy that, I recommend to have the experience of the first game beforehand. With the last statement I just made, you're probably thinking, why the hell are we continuing? I bet I need to have experienced the last 2 games to play this one. Well, yes, but not really. Yakuza III, in some way, marks a new beginning for the life of our protagonist, Kiryu Kazuma. This is the game where the stories are more of their own thing, and don't ask for too much to understand what's going on. At first you might get a bit confused about what they mean when they bring up a specific term. Or you might not get who these returning characters are. Who's this funny eye patch guy? Why is this reporter suddenly important to Kiryu? Wow, this female detective is really cool. I hope she appears in future games. It's a minor inconvenience, but nothing that will get in the way of your enjoyment. And I can confirm that from personal experience. Yakuza III was the first game in the series I ever played, and it left a huge impression on me. The story was enjoyable, the combat was immensely satisfying, and I was always looking forward to doing more activities. A huge advantage that we have nowadays is that Yakuza 3, 4 and 5 are way more accessible than they were in the past, thanks to their remastered collection. 3 in particular is a standout, because the original American release on the PlayStation 3 had a lot of cut content and weird localization changes. So the remaster gives it a better translation and even has more juice than it had in the past. So yeah, I can argue that 3 is a good starting point for newcomers. It's very accessible, it doesn't ask for too much prior knowledge, and it's a great time that also lets you know how different Yakuza games felt before. This is a rare instance where I'll get two games out of the way in one shot. Yakuza 4 and 5 are not good starting points for newcomers. And not because they are bad games, no, what they bring to the table is enough to make them worth your time. But I think you get the most out of them by playing 3, 4 and 5 in order to witness the series' growth. Yakuza 4 improved the formula by bringing 4 playable characters, each having their own story and bringing their own unique fighting style that vastly differ from one another, like raw power, swift kicks, and parrying enemy attacks. Yakuza 5 went even further than that. It didn't just deliver 5 playable characters with 2 brand new ones. I feel bad for what happened to Tanimura. It gave us 5 cities to explore, added special techniques for the characters, revamped the combat system, and it started to introduce minigames with actual stories in them. While both games excel in the gameplay department, there's something I'm not a big fan of, and that's the stories. Individually, they're enjoyable as their own contained narrative for each protagonist. But once the game starts to connect them all, it's a mess. They try to be more complex than they are, and feel like they prioritize shock value rather than a cohesive narrative. Yakuza 5 in particular has it even worse, and I'll just say it right now. Aside from Shinada's arc, which I think is really damn good, and a few tidbits in and there, I don't like this story. It's confusing, it's forgettable, you have no idea how much I fucking hate that ending. One of the worst I've seen in a video game. It actually pisses me off. Most of the writing is straight up bad. The main theme of the game is about following your dreams. But fuck, they repeat the word dreams or yume every 5 seconds. More times than Kingdom Hearts says the words light and darkness. And the pacing is horrible. Being forced to play minigames to progress is really stupid. I don't expect everyone to receive a mandatory idle rhythm minigame with open arms, especially when they repeat the same section of the same song every time. Before I get more worked up, I'll just conclude. Yakuza 4 and 5 are not what I will call the best entry points for newcomers. And despite what I think about the stories once they connect, they're still really good games from a pure gameplay standpoint that continue to improve while also delivering on the content, giving you hours upon hours of things to do. Normally I tend to leave spin-offs outside of these videos, but I'm making a few exceptions this time because I really wanted to talk about Yakuza Dead Souls again. I already have an entire review on it if you want a more in-depth look at the game. Just keep in mind I used to talk really fast back then.
I mean, it's not a bad idea. Weird spin-offs can be pretty fun. Just look at Red Dead Redemption's of Dead's Nightmare. I'll keep it brief.
Yakuza Dead Souls is not just a bad starting point for newcomers. It's a bad game in general. The gameplay sucks. The mechanics rarely work. It gets repetitive very fast, and it almost killed the series in the West. And no, I didn't make that up. If fans hadn't shown their passion for the games, Dead Souls would have been the end of the series outside of Japan. So why did I bother bringing it up? Because if you're a Yakuza fan, this game is worth trying at least once. The story's so stupid, it's really enjoyable. The side stories are very creative and bring out that Yakuza charm in a new zombie environment. And the game is bursting with so much fan service it feels like a fanfiction. I mean, just look at the main cast of characters. The main protagonist, the fan favorite from Yakuza 4, the best antagonist, and arguably the most iconic guy in the franchise. This is a wet dream for the fans! Just remember, Dead Souls is a terrible game, but one you can find a certain enjoyment in the more attached you grow to the series.
In these videos, there's usually 1 or 2 games I show an inherent bias towards, so I might as well get away with it now.
Yakuza Zero, since the moment I first finished it, has been and still remains my fucking favorite Yakuza game and one of my favorite video games in general. A quick rundown is not enough to do it justice, but I'll try to explain as best as possible why this game is an absolute masterpiece. I cannot even begin to describe how perfect the combat is. 2 playable characters, each packing 4 different fighting styles that are equally as fun to play as and are extremely polished. The game's focus on earning mountains of cash, combined with a seemingly endless array of hit actions, make it so that every battle delivers in excitement and reward, while always keeping themselves fresh. The presentation is top-notch. The setting of the game during Japan's financial bubble of the late 1980s was genius to implement core gameplay mechanics. The sub-stories are hilarious, the minigames are addictive, the music ranks up the action to absurd levels, and the story is seriously one of them, if not the best in the entire series. The premise is gripping. The plot twists carry a lot of weight to them. Having just 2 protagonists makes the narrative more focused. The supporting cast is memorable. The villains are excellent. And the most important part, it will make you feel a lot of emotions. It'll excite you, anger you, and make you fucking cry, whether you like it or not.
Alright, I finally calmed down. So, you know what's the best part about it?
Yakuza Zero is an excellent entry point for newcomers. Since it is the first game chronologically, aside from these 2, you're not asked for anything to understand what's going on. So previous knowledge is something you shouldn't worry about. But here's the thing. You can see how high the pedestal I put Yakuza Zero on. So I ask you, do you want to start with what I, and many people consider to be the best in the series? Or do you want something lighter to get started and save the best for later? There's no wrong answer, just personal preference. So if you choose the latter, I think the next game might convince you. Yakuza Kiwami is another game I have reviewed in the past. One of my first videos in fact, which means I can't stand rewatching them right now. So to not drag this any longer, Kiwami is a full remake of the first Yakuza game on the PS2. And it does so much to make it a different experience all things considered. You have amazing looking graphics, a combat system more reminiscent of Yakuza Zero, which is excellent, new extra modes and minigames, and more cutscenes that help to make the story clearer and more believable. The only problem with the game is that, inherently, it still carries some of the negative aspects from the first Yakuza, mainly a weak pacing, infuriating boss battles, and basic side stories. But honestly, Kiwami is still a no-brainer, one of the best options for newcomers to the series. You almost have no reason to pick the original over this, unless you're really curious or want to listen to its hilariously bad English voice acting. Did you know that Mark Hamill voiced Goro Majima in Yakuza 1? Bet you didn't see that one coming.
I should kill you. Stupid! Fucking motherfucker!
No,
Yakuza 6 is the last game you should consider starting with, as it is quite literally a conclusion to the story of Kiryu Kazuma as a protagonist, and the catalyst of the plot is directly tied to Yakuza V's soulful ending. 6 was the first game to introduce what we know today as the Dragon Engine, which absolutely delivers in the graphics department while also giving a new feel to the combat, and that's pretty much all I can say. 6 is just a standard Yakuza game with ups and downs all the way. The new engine looks great, but the combat that accompanies it lacked a bit of polish. It doesn't have the same variety, nor does it feel as good as in Yakuza Zero and Kiwami. The story is enjoyable and easy to follow. It has likable characters, cool moments, but also a few stupid plot devices. The humor is great, the side stories are insanely fun, and the boss fights are memorable. All in all, Yakuza 6 is a great game. Not the best in the series, and not the best for newcomers, but one you should definitely play eventually in the future. Yakuza Kiwami 2, as the name implies, is a complete overhaul of the original sequel. But unlike Kiwami 1 that felt like a small extra for those who enjoyed Yakuza 0, Kiwami 2 improved every single aspect from Yakuza 6. It's bigger, better, and far more polished. Combat doesn't feel as sluggish as before. Exploration is seamless. The content is way more varied, the visuals are top notch, and the best part of it? The story is just as amazing as it was on the PS2, including a new storyline that guarantees Yakuza 0 fans will get emotionally destroyed. I know I did. Kiwami 2 succeeds because it reinvented the original Yakuza 2 while also fixing the areas where 6 fell short, making a game that is far more engaging and polished, that also does a great job in retelling one of the greatest stories the franchise has delivered. But just like the original, it's not what I will recommend you to start with. If you're going to play any of the Yakuza 2, just make sure you already played the first game or Kiwami 1. And if you want that added bonus from the extra story, make sure you already played Yakuza 0.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, there's 2 games left. Judgment and Yakuza Like a Dragon. But I'll just say it now. At the time of this video, I still don't play them. But don't worry, I called a professional to help me with this. So to not take any more of your time, I present to you Macca.
Hello, my friend the game Lewis. I am so happy you invited me all the way to Mexico for a collab. Initially releasing in 2018 in Japan and 2019 in the West, Judgment, known in Japan as Judge Eyes, is in a bit of a gray area on whether or not it's even a Yakuza game. While it retains the 3D beat-em-up combat and the setting of Kamurocho, Judgment's story is very different from previous Yakuza games. Rather than starring the seedy underbelly of Japan, you play as Takayuki Yagami, a defense lawyer turned detective after a legal incident tarnished his reputation. For once, Ryu Gotoku Studios had made a game that took place on the legal side of the law, and as a result, the story, presentation, and characters are much more unique when compared to the series thus far. Series creator Toshihiro Nagoshi refrains from calling Judgment a Yakuza spin-off due to its different narrative themes, though personally I believe it's because they were trying to stage it as something brand new so potential buyers wouldn't just write it off as just another Ryu Gotoku game. They even went as far as purposefully not including any characters or any important elements from the Yakuza series as to better establish Judgment as its own entity. As someone who has played every Yakuza game that has been released in the West, Judgment is easily one of the best stories in the franchise. It's a murder mystery with a large focus on the Japanese legal system and a bigger focus on government corruption than the standard Yakuza plot. In terms of gameplay, the game was able to merge the fantastic style system of Yakuza 0 with the beauty of the Dragon engine, creating what I believe to be the best feeling combat in the franchise. Though one blemish on this game's record is the lack of the staple karaoke minigame. I don't care if the other minigames are stellar. You put that shit back in the eventual sequel, or I am personally going to yell into the void that is the Sega of America PR email! But let's say you want to flip some things around. Maybe instead of a story that takes you on the righteous side of the law and traditional Yakuza combat, you want a more traditional Yakuza story with combat that feels more Square Enix-y. Yakuza Like a Dragon, also known as Yakuza 7, is the most different entry in the franchise for a large number of reasons, first and foremost being the brand new cast of characters. Yakuza 7 stars Ichiban Kasuga, a man who quite literally missed the entirety of the franchise due to taking the fall for a fellow Yakuza member and going to jail in the year 2001. After being released 18 years later, Ichiban finds the world he once knew has turned its back on him. The second difference is the biggest one. While the Yakuza series has remained a 3D beat-em-up its entire legacy, Like a Dragon reinvents the game as a turn-based RPG inspired by some of the most important entries into the JRPG genre: Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, and most importantly, Dragon Quest. Hell, they even get a little bit of Persona in there with the UI, graphic design, social stats, and the Yakuza equivalent of social links. Both Judgment and Yakuza Like a Dragon were created with two simple goals in mind. One, to regain wayward fans that had lost interest over the recent entries by creating some of the most unique and highest quality games the studio had ever made. And two, to act as a brand new starting point for players to jump on board with a 16-year-old franchise with a high barrier to entry. It's for both of these reasons these games are fantastic entry points into the franchise, with the only drawbacks for them being that they make it harder to go back and play the older games due to the quality of life improvements these two make.
Thanks a lot for your help, Mac. Okay everyone, so here's what Macca and I think are the best options to get into the series.
The advantage to Yakuza is that all the mainline games are very accessible, so you have a lot of possibilities to start with. Yakuza Kiwami is the most obvious pick. It refreshes the first entry while giving it more value. It's very simple and it gives you a taste of what the series is all about. Yakuza Zero is also an excellent choice. You don't require any previous knowledge to enjoy this one. It has one of the best stories, the best combat, and delivers a ton of content without feeling bloated. Yakuza III is another entry point to consider. The story sort of hits a refresh button, so you're not asked for a lot in order to enjoy it. Starting with this one is what I will recommend if you want to see how the gameplay continued to improve while the developers added new ideas and refined the combat.
As I said before, both Judgment and Yakuza Like a Dragon are not only fantastic games, but they're also fantastic entry points that are just as good a starting point as Zero and Kiwami. Both offer something new and different from previous entries, while still retaining aspects of the series that make these two almost complementary to each other. Not to mention, both of these games are the first since the original on the PS2 to get an English dub. And unlike Yakuza 1, it's actually good this time. Really good. I'm still playing in Japanese though. I can't go 7 games and 2 remakes of Japanese-only audio and just casually start playing this series in English.
The Yakuza games are special because they manage to be different while keeping the fun factor intact. They can be emotional, unpredictable, or just batshit insane. In fact, they are so good that actual Yakuza members have said they enjoyed the games. I've never seen a single hedgehog say they enjoyed the Sonic the Hedgehog series.